So welcome to our second session in the grant writing skills series. Today we're talking about writing about your research. We're focusing in on that. I am Jesse Singleton. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Support here at the Graduate School. Maybe you've met me before, maybe you haven't. For our folks in the room, how many of you attended our first session? One. Just one. For folks online, how many of you attended the first section on finding funding? I'll open the chat so I can see. A few folks, maybe. All right, thank you. All right. Well, I appreciate welcoming you back. This session is our design to scaffold on one another. If you missed the first session, we do a recording of it. I encourage you to check out. That's about how you navigate the actual funding search. Today we're going to be talking about writing about your research, but I'm glad to have some folks back in the room when we're talking about it today. I'm going to do my best to manage both the virtual space and the online one. For our folks online, if you have any issues, let me know. Drop those in the chat. I'll be looking at your questions, paying attention to it. Again, our technology is a little bit challenging today. I think we should be fine, but I want to make sure I keep track of you. So if you have any issues, speak up if you're not being heard, so I can help you with that. All right. All right. I also always want to take a moment when we start these sessions to thank Jen Green, who is the director of the Office of the Student Fellowships and Awards. The presentation series that we've developed, she really helped us with the content last year and was the presenter for it. She was kind enough to provide us that content, train us on it at the graduate school. And so we always appreciate her help and support on this. So I always like to reference and let her know, or speak highly of her. She's also a great resource for you if you're looking at Fulbright or NSF-GRFP, because their office does help with that. The way we kind of describe it is NSF-GRFP and Fulbright. Jen will help as well at the graduate school, but she takes the lead on those. Everything in the graduate funding sphere is outside of those two opportunities comes to the graduate school for us to help you out. And she focuses mostly on the undergrad. So our overall goal in these workshops is to give you a basic understanding and set of skills to apply for pretty much any grant, scholarship, fellowship thing you're going to be finding. We unfortunately cannot be experts in every funding source in every field, right? And some of you will be in very divergent fields. You have folks that are in electrical engineering and someone from chemistry, and then someone from Borderlands history, all in the same session, right? Your funding sources are very different in those regards, right? And so this is particularly true when you get to graduate school. The funding sources become very divergent. The way you apply for them becomes divergent. And so it's not possible for us to be the experts in all of them. So we're going to give you a basic foundation that you know that we are here to support you no matter what, right? As you find your way towards becoming your own expert in this. And the things that we apply and talk about here are broadly applicable, right? There will be nuances for your field, but we're broadly applicable in the things that we talk about. Please do mark your calendars. As I mentioned, there are scaffolding to these sessions and other opportunities you can take part in. As I'm discussing this, if you can do me a favor, our folks that are online and our folks that are in person, if you could scan that QR code and mark your attendance, it would really help me out to help show our attendance for that. That is what helps us keep doing these sessions for you all. Also, I'm tracking attendance because there is a, you can get a bookstore gift card for completing the graduate skills, grant writing skills series, right? If you do all the requirements, you submit a funding app, I'll give you a bookstore gift card, right? And so when you track your attendance, I mark that off. And so let us know for that, but please go ahead and scan that code for me so I know you're here. I'll leave that for a little bit and then I'll maybe come back to it at the very end and remind people to take attendance. But we have the mini retreat in this room next week, Wednesday, from 1 to 3. That is a mini writing retreat. Our focus there is today we're going to talk about writing about your research, and the idea is that next week you can come back and do some work on that, right? Apply the things we're talking about. And if you have questions, I can help you out with that, or the writing coaches just on their side of that wall can help you with your research proposal for these grants, right? And so that's intentionally put that the week after. And then on November 13th, we have the third instructional session for the semester, and that is about writing your personal statement, right? So we're going to talk a bit about that. When you think about your grant application, you find the right funding opportunity. There are two major components typically, the research statement and the personal statement. And so you need to be able to work on both. We're going to give you the instruction on personal statements next month. And then we're gonna have a mini retreat following that one as well. The idea being that you come back that next week, bring that personal statement, or start writing it, and we're here to support you on it. With the hope that by the time you finish up this semester, you went along all the steps, you've identified a funding source, you put together your research statement, your proposal, and by the end of the semester or moving into spring, you're ready to apply and submit that grant application, right? That's our hope. And we're here to support you along that journey. As we think about your research statement and the reason why you're doing it in the first place and why it's part of your grants and applications, the research statement does some fundamental things for you, right? None of this is groundbreaking, but it's important to understand why they're asking for these, right? First is it's going to describe the purpose of your funding and what you intend to do, right? Now, when you think about how you secure funding, it's important to remember the funder, the person giving you the money, is not really funding your research, right? They're giving you money for research, they're not funding your research. They're funding you. They believe in you. There are other people applying for similar funding, potentially doing similar research, right? If you apply for a grant related to cancer research, there are other people doing similar research. Maybe not the novel approach that you're doing, they're doing similar research. The funder believes in you and wants you to do the research, right? And so this research statement describes the purpose of what you propose to do with that funding, right? It's going to need to clearly state why your research is important. What is compelling about it for that funder, right? And you are uniquely situated to explain that as a person who's passionate about it, who's chosen that topic. It needs to convince the reviewer that you are a safe bet, right? Your research can be amazing. You might have great methods, but if you don't seem like a safe bet that you're going to conduct the research, they will not want to provide you the funding. They fund you, not necessarily the research, right? If you don't get the research done, you don't spend the money will transition to someone else, and someone else does the cancer research, they're funding you. So your research statement needs to show that you're a safe bet. You're going to utilize the funding, right? One of the things a funder wants to avoid most is issuing funding to someone that then doesn't use it, right? That means someone else lost out on that opportunity, right? To think about this, we have an internal grant here at the graduate school. Actually, the application just closed yesterday, the Dodson Research Grant. And a lot of really, hopefully great applications for it. I know we had a lot of applications. Obviously, I haven't screened all of them yet, it just closed yesterday. But one of the issues is that we want to evaluate in that grant, can you reasonably do the research you're talking about, spend the money we're giving you by July? Because the money does not roll over from an institutional perspective. So if you don't use it by the end of July, that money is gone. And if I gave it to you and not someone else, and you don't use it, someone else didn't do research and now you wasted money. So that's what a funder wants to avoid. Because if they give it to you and you don't use it, they may be able to recoup it, but they've lost an opportunity. So are you a safe bet to actually do what you're talking about? People in the room here. And then you want to demonstrate how your research supports the funding agency's goals, right? What are they looking to do as an organization? How are you furthering that mission, that goal, that objective in a unique way? What's important is you do want to make sure that your research statement is written specifically for the award that you are pursuing, right? If you're applying for a lot of different funding, it can be tempting to essentially write a research statement, right? This is what I'm doing. My research hasn't changed from funder A to funder B to funder Z, right? I'm just going to recycle that and send it forward. It can be tempting to do that, but that is going to lead to less successful results for you, right? I'm not going to say you'll never get funding, but you're not going to get the funding you're looking for typically. You'll be less successful. What you don't want to do is give the same statement for any award, regardless of purpose, and just kind of slightly alter it, go and tailor it, and okay, here you go, right? Because every funder is going to be unique. Unique objective, aims, flavor of organization, right? What they're able to fund. And if you recycle the same stuff over and over again, they're going to notice, right? It won't feel like it's tailored to them. So make sure that when you're writing and sitting down to do this, that you are generating new content, that you're really tailoring it to what they want. also make sure you're doing a deep dive on the award that you're interested in. So if you went and you found that funding source and you're getting into writing the research statement, you need to fully understand the organization in order to successfully. Yeah, I'm in the right spot. Sorry, had a moment of cognitive dissonance, and I'm like, wait, am I in the right spot? I am. Yes, sorry. And so make sure that you're fully understanding that organization and what they're doing in order to tailor that research statement to it, right? And make sure that you're writing something that you're going to be able to use, right? It may seem like that wouldn't happen to me, but we've definitely had folks that have went through, put a lot of time invested into a grant application, and then found out on the back end they are not eligible for it. It's a lot of wasted time. You don't have time to waste. So make sure you're diving deeply into the eligibility for that grant, that fellowship, whatever you're applying for. Look at the about section for the mission statement, right? Does this align with your research objectives and your personal mission and vision, right? You might find a great funding source, but the mission statement for the organization seems fundamentally opposed to your objectives. Do you want to apply for that funding, right? Example I'll use, and I'm making no value judgments in any of this, but if you were heavily in the area of conservation, right? And the funding source is with ExxonMobil, is there a conflict for you there? Maybe yes, maybe no, right? You might see that as a conflict, you might see that as, Jesse, they do more than you think in conservation, and I want to be a part of that. That's your own value judgment, but you want to make sure you know that, right? So don't sell out your own values, make sure that you find that. Look at the application materials. What do you need to provide? Is there specificity in the research statement that goes beyond the normal that you need to provide? And the structure for that, right? When you look at Department of Education grants, they are incredibly complex and different and counterintuitive sometimes, so we see other grant applications. So your research data needs to be structured to fit that. Look at the profiles of previous recipients. We say there, look but don't stare, right? If you start not seeing yourself represented, you maybe feel discouraged to apply. Just because you don't see yourself out there doesn't mean you can't be successful, and just because someone else has been successful doesn't mean that that's the only profile that will fit, but it's helpful sometimes to look and see who's won. And then if they have review criteria available, make sure you're really spending some time evaluating that and taking them into account how you write, right? Dotson, I'll use that as an example a lot because it's our internal process, right? We've designed that grant. It's a small internal grant with the institution. I have intentionally designed that to help you learn skills to apply for big grants outside of it. So the info section talks about how we do it, navigate it, how we evaluate, how we give feedback. I will give you the rubric in that section and say, this is how we're evaluating you. This is the story. This is the, how we do it. So that you can write to that and be successful at it, right? Not everyone's going to do that, but if they give you that, you best take advantage of it. And again, you'd be surprised how many students where it's like, we have an info section, they didn't attend it, they still apply. That's a missed opportunity, right? The rubric's available, they didn't look at it. And the difference between getting funding and not was on that rubric, right? The budget didn't outline the way we want it to. The individualized development plan doesn't have what we're looking for on it. You can read the criteria and look at your application and say, am I going to get full points? So if you have that opportunity, look at that and then craft your research statement that way. You can talk to and see if there are faculty who've served on review panels, right? Again, just because they've done it before doesn't mean that how it is consistently done, but it's good to get that perspective. And also think about when they did it. Yes, I reviewed for this Ornithological Society's grant 20 years ago. Okay, how relevant is that today? Maybe yes, maybe no. But if you have someone on campus that's been a reviewer, might be helpful to talk to them. And then be mindful of taking any advice from anyone who has received the grant previously, right? You talk to a peer in your program who's a little advanced than you, they've applied for this grant, they received it, and they tell you, this is what I did to be successful. That is one data point, right? We don't make decisions on one data point. They can inform our thinking, right? Help drive some creativity, But don't be like, well, that's how they did it, so that's how I need to do it. That's one data point, it's not the only path towards success, it's not guaranteed to be successful a second time. One thing you have to remember as you're thinking about applying for grants is that they're gonna be reviewed by human beings and committees. And what those individuals are looking for in any given year may change, opinions may change, level of proficiency reviewing may change, right? So don't take one person's experience as this is how it's gotta be. Always follow the prompts very carefully. In general, this is what you're gonna get, right? But again, depending on, take off my office jacket, it's a little chilly today, but it's a little warmer in here. The prompts there's gonna be a lot of things in that prompt, and I mentioned the Department of Education. We have that experience in the graduate school we've applied for. We received some, not all, but we applied for some Department of Education grants within the graduate school to fund different initiatives. And those are really, really complicated, like multi-layer, step A, DAC 1C, section, stuff like that kind of thing. We really gotta dig in deep and understand the proposal, right? So make sure whatever you're applying for, you really look at that very closely, make sure you're hearing to that. But in general, you can expect these things that you'll need to cover, right? So first thinking about what do you want to do with the funding, does it fit the mission, right? Crafting that for that specific award, right? You reasonably in a research statement are going to have to cover that, no matter who you're applying for, right? Tell us what you want to do and why it fits their mission, right? Make sure that makes sense. If you review the statement and you're like, I don't fit their mission, but I want the funding anyway, you have a hard time pulling the wool over their eyes and getting that to work, right? And even if you do, then you write your closeout report, you can get in further trouble. So make sure it actually makes sense what you're doing. You're gonna need to talk about why your research is important and what the implications are for your field and beyond. And this is sometimes what gets missed in the research statement. You tell us all about this research and you get heavy into the details of the scientific minutia of the research you're doing, and you're missing what are the implications for your field and beyond. That broad applicability is really important, particularly in NSF/GRFP applications. They want to know broad applicability, right? And that can be for any research topic, right? I'm not just talking about the STEM fields and talking about cancer research. I'm talking about in the humanities and digging into medieval literature. What is the importance there in your field and beyond? Talk about that. Also know why it must be done by you, right? How are you uniquely qualified to do this? And you are, right? You selected this topic, this research, you are uniquely qualified. Tell them why it needs to be you. Now, keep in mind, you're gonna have a personal statement that is separate. So you're talking about why you need to do this research, not about your personal story yet, right? And we'll cover personal statements next month. Come back and talk to us about that because there's some differentiation there, right? You want those two things to fit together, but they're not a repeat of one another. And think about how does the project support any long-term educational or professional goals? You're applying as graduate students. Funders know you're applying as graduate students. They want to invest in you, in your education, your future, your future graduation, and where you go next, right? So you got to talk about how this builds you into that scientist, that researcher, whatever you're doing, right? They're going to fund you, not the research, right? You'll use that funding for the research. They're funding you in this process, though. Lost my clicker there for a second. All right. Now, when you're actually getting into the business of writing, you want to have a brief statement or summary, the necessary background information, right? Now, what I'll tell you is this is not your starting point. I'm going to talk about how you structure and start your research essay. This research summary and the background information is not really necessarily where you start, okay? But no, you're going to need to include that. And it should be brief. You all are the experts in your research, in your field, and you can go into serious depth with your research, right? It's not necessary in the grant application. You need to think about what do they need to know and how will I not lose them along the way. You also need to consider, and I think I may even cover this a little later, but I'll talk about this, make sure I mention it. Think about your audience and that you're writing to a lay audience, right? Educated lay audience, not necessarily someone who is doing the research alongside you and is an expert in that research, right? And so if you give me way too much explanation on the technical side of your research, you're going to lose me, right? So brief statement summarizing what's necessary for them to know to review your application or your understand the research. Got to talk about what methods you're going to use. Is it a new novel approach? Excellent if it is. And then what's the open question you're working to address? Or what's happening here? Why are we doing this research? Right? Tell us about it. Do set a realistic time frame for the work and talk about that time frame and make sure it fits the funder's objectives for funding, right? Dotson grant has to be expended by July 2025. If you put in there that you plan on spending the money in August 2025, when you go to a research site, I'm not going to give you the money, right? Doesn't fit my timeline. So make sure you're looking at any timelines for funding within that grant and then setting a realistic timeline for you doing it, right? If you did review the Dotson Research Grant, and this is an example a lot, that's an internal one, it's a small one, but if you reviewed it and you're like, oh, I want to apply for it, but I need to use it in August, but then you write a timeline that says I'm going to do it in June, knowing you can't, that's not realistic and that's going to cause an issue later. You don't want to return or not use the funding after I report that, sorry, I couldn't do it in time frame. So make sure your timeline is appropriate. Then if what you would need to do is not, think about applying in the next cycle, right? So if you're like, oh, I know I need to travel in August, well, then apply the next time that Dotson comes around or figure out that time frame with us, right? And then think about what anticipated results you will have and how you're going to share those outcomes, right? What's going to happen from this cancer research that you're showing? How are you going to share and provide that back? And again, as we go through any of this, please, people in the room ask questions, people online ask questions. We went through a pretty good clip. I know we got a good amount of time for the session today. If you need me to slow down anything, review anything, if I'm not being clear on stuff, please let me know that as we go along. So you think about how you communicate this. This is really important. I hinted at this with talking about the lay audience and like how we convey information, right? What we see here in this diagram that was pulled from Communicating Science Club Climate Change, right, from Physics Today, right? We modified this a little bit to kind of talk about essentially how we tend to communicate things as scientists, right? And we say, I'm actually not a scientist, right? I'm not. But how scientists, you all will tend to communicate versus how the public will receive the information best. We tend to be that green triangle, right? Starting with all the background information, giving you all the stuff all at once, tell you everything I feel like you need to know. Like, it's all really important. And then we give you, start willing down to supporting details. And then at the end, we give you the results and the conclusion. Think about a research article that you've written and been published on or you've read, right? A lot of times it may be structured that way, right? You get past the abstract and it's like, here's all the stuff you need to know in order to understand this topic. Here are all the details. At the very end, you got your results and your conclusion, right? Problem is, a lay audience, a reviewer, the general public, that's not the best way for them to consume the information, right? When you are a researcher in that field, digesting it, this may work for you, it will not work for me, right? Your reviewer needs it the other way around, right? I need to start with your supporting details, right? Tell me about why it's important. Then give me what's the so what, right? All the details on why you're doing this research, why it's important, right? For you, the field, impact beyond, community outcomes, and then give me the bottom line. What are you looking to achieve? Sell me, right? So you can't structure the research statement as like a research article. It's not persuasive in the way it needs to be, right? The example I'll use is when I went through my master's program in administrative leadership, when we get all these articles we read consistently for conversation in our classes and things like that. And it wasn't a research and methodology heavy, they weren't courses that way, right? We're discussing mostly theory and impact. And so I get these articles and I would skim the methodology section very briefly to make sure it seemed valid. And then I would get really the most important thing would be the conclusions, right? At the end of the article. That's where it's been my close reading time, because that's what we're going to be discussing, right? The methodology was almost irrelevant to the classroom discussion on this topic, right? But if I was doing the research, the methodology would be much more important for me because I may want to replicate that, right? Think of your reviewers as that classroom discussion, right? So when you have that first 2 paragraphs of your research statement, again, these are typically not very long, right? Think about your reviewers, they also have a short attention span, they're reading a lot of different applications. They're typically going to give you tight page limits for this, which is great because it also means that you're not writing novels to apply for a grant, right? You're writing shorter things, but brevity actually gets more difficult as you get more educated and smart about what you do, right? When you were a freshman and we said write a 5-page paper, you were like, 5 pages? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna fill 5 pages. Now it's like doctoral and master's students are like, write a 5-page summary, and you're like, I can't fit that in 5 pages. Now write 1-page research statement, right? Fit all your research in 1 page. That's hard. So you got to make some ruthless cuts. Your first 1 or 2 paragraphs are with hooking your people in and selling them on what you do. If those first two paragraphs aren't effective, you'll have a hard time getting the funding. So in those first paragraphs, summarize what you want to do, why you want to do it, and why it's important for your field and beyond. I'm going to harp on that. We got to know the broader impacts, right? Funders want to see that. Then dig into the background, right? It's these 3 questions first. I want to research cancer. I want to do that so that I can have an impact on my community. And maybe I had family that had suffered through cancer and I've lived through that and I want to change that. And it's important to the field because I have this novel approach that I think can revolutionize our care in this sector. And let me give you all the information on how I'm going to do that in my methodology here in the next section, right? Pull them along in your story. Also need to be aware of the curse of knowledge, right? You're all smart, very knowledgeable of what you're doing. Knock on wood, I hope. Right? If you're here, you are, right? Much more knowledgeable than I am about any of your topics, right? You need to be able to convey that to a lay audience, right? And I get into an example here. Before I get into this example, I'm going to use an even more recent example. We think about how science has been portrayed recently, right? Think about COVID and the distrust the public has had around science and COVID, and not understanding the scientific process that comes along with evaluating that disease. They say, well, you know, a month ago you said do this, and now you're saying that's not true. Yeah, science is messy. Right? We give you general thoughts and we're evaluating in real time. This is a part of an experience where the public was a part of the scientific method in real time, sharing that experience. Boy, is that hard, right? So that's why people didn't trust it. They also didn't understand it when things weren't told to them in a way that they could digest it and buy into it, right? So you got to be careful about how you communicate that, right? The example I'll use is a bit older, but I think it's a really good one. It's got some concrete like demonstration of like how things were not communicated well and the issue it caused, right? So is anyone old enough like me to remember the anthrax scare of the early 2000s? Heard of it, right? I'm pretty old. I'm pushing 40. I remember this, I was a kid, I was in high school when this was happening, right? I remember people were worried about being sent anthrax in the mail because there were some instances where some things were sent to government offices and they'd come back with all these different things like that. And everyone was scared of it, right? And this is the actual CDC's website originally posted on their FAQ. What is anthrax? Okay, yeah, right? They posted Bacillus anthracis. The etiological agent of anthrax is a large gram-positive, non-motile, spore-forming bacterial rot. The three virulent factors of B. anthracis are edema toxin, lethal toxin, and capsular antigen.
Sounds like a bunch of scary words.
That's terrifying, right? But also unintelligible. If you are the general public and you are worried or just want to be more informed of what's happening and you go to the CDC's website and you see that, do you understand anything? No. Even if you're a research scientist, you might be like, you're working in the field of some kind of tertiary related field, you could be in cancer research, still not know any of that, right? Unless you're working specifically in working with antigens and germs and all that, like, I don't even know, right? This is what they posted. Did not do anything to alleviate the public concern, right? This was eventually changed to anthrax is a disease caused by bacteria. It can be fatal, but is usually curable.
Much more reassuring.
Yep. They actually say pretty much the same thing. This is the example. This is what I need you to do. When you think about your research, right? I need you to go from here, Bacillus anthracis, to it's a disease caused by bacteria. This is something reasonably understood by an educated person, right? I do an exercise occasionally, and I'll maybe challenge you to do this, kind of think about this for yourself, right? I call it the 6-word research statement, right? I've stole that from someone else, I'm gonna tell you really honest. There's a whole competition related to this called the 6-word memoir, right? And it's all based off of, I think someone challenged Ernest Hemingway, to tell a short story of meaning in 6 words, right? And his response was, baby shoes for sale, never worn. 6-word story, right? Has an emotional resonance and impact in 6 words, right? And so this idea of like, tell your story in 6 words. What is your story in 6 words? I've challenged people, tell me your research in 6 words, right? And I've had that conversation where I'm talking about, make sure it's intelligible. And I'm the one that has to understand it. I'll say, tell me your research in 6 words. And I'll get that from a lot of people, right? They will do what's called Latinizing your diction, right? Tell me all the big scientific words. I'm like, I got none of that. Thank you for sharing your 6 words. I got none of it. And that's the real world. Like, I need your 6 words to make sense, right? And I've had other people tell things like, without breath, there is no life, right? And they're in exercise science, right? And they're looking at breathing patterns of exercise, right? Where was I at? We'll say I was here. That is a good distillation of their research. So when you think about what you're doing, can you distill your research in 6 words and make it descriptive and intelligible, right? Do that, right? If you're thinking about writing this, sit down and be like, okay, how do I do this? I mean, what are my 6 words? And if you come up with 6 unconnected words, missing the point too, right? And that will help you, I think, drive the idea of how I write this in a way that people are going to understand. They're going to buy into it, right? So that's important, very important for what you do. Double check and make sure I'm not missing on the chats or the participants. I think we're good. All right. Make sure you, again, also know your audience to the best of your ability in what you're doing. This can be tough, but research the funder, research the review. They give you the information about that. If you can tell who is doing it, that's really important, right? Know, are they going to be in your field or are they non-experts, right? And you may see where I'm applying for a funding agency, like I'm applying to National Institute of Health. They're going to be people in my field reviewing it, right? Versus I am applying to a community grant that is going to go out to potentially donors and things like that want to fund. They are not experts in my field. They're interested parties, right? Either one of those could be true. That's going to need to dictate how you write your research proposal, right? Think about what extent you need to distill your research. It depends on your audience, right? If you could reasonably expect that people reviewing it are have doctorates in the field of virology, like they're gonna understand it a bit more, I can be a little bit more technical in my description, right? Or I'm reasonably expecting that it's gonna be people just working in the health sciences that have not necessarily the context on cancer research. So I need to be a little bit more broad, right? Think about that, if you can find out, and maybe you need to ask the funder a little bit more, if they'll tell you, give me an idea of what my audience is. Generally, you want to kind of think of it as that it's not likely they're going to be an expert in your specific subfield, right? Even if they are evaluating and doing research into disease, are they researching cancer, right? Or are they working on, I don't know, anything else? Can't think of it right now. Alzheimer's, right? Memory loss, an issue, right? Is that where their focus is? But now they're looking at this other thing, right? So know that it's not likely they're going to know exactly what you're doing. And if you're working on a really novel approach, even if they're working in your area, they may not be familiar with your approach, right? So don't assume. And again, based on your award interest, what are their priorities, right? If you're applying for a grant that is specifically looking at like community impact and underserved populations, you're gonna wanna write towards that, right? Not every funder is in that area, right? But if your funder is about empowering women in engineering as a demographic that is not typically empowered in that field, your research statement should flavor that way, right? And you should fit it. All right. So how do you make that personal statement from work on next month work with your research statement? So that statement of purpose is about the proposed research, and the personal statement is your educational and professional journey, right? And I want to tell you this now because I want you to start working on your research proposal, and I don't want you to start bleeding over too much into the statement of purpose, right? The personal statement. So how are we differentiating, right? You're focusing on the research and the research proposal, and you're standing away from the educational and professional journey, right? You can talk about how it'll help you graduate or move through, right? But telling your story of where you're going comes in the personal statement, right? To differentiate that. You will have some overlap, but you don't want redundancy. In your research proposal, talking about how conducting this research will enable you to finish your dissertation and graduate and seek a postdoc position here, or work in this national laboratory here, where you're going is going to overlap with the personal statement of why you're in your field and what you want to do and what drives and motivates you in that long-term career goal. There's an overlap there, but you're not telling the same thing twice. You need to think of it like, if someone just read my research proposal, they're going to get it. If they just read my personal statement, they're going to get it, right? And you're also not leaving too many direct breadcrumbs where if you read one before the other, it doesn't make sense, right? You can't assume that they're going to start with a research proposal and then move to your personal statement. It's not like a sequel, right? They jumped in to the second part and now they have no idea what's going on. They're lost. You have to kind of think of them as independently. They may start anywhere. So how do I lead them through, right? Good way to do this is actually give this to someone out of order, right? How have you written it? Say, does this make sense, right? Or give them just one piece. Does this make sense? Do you feel like you're missing context, right? Rely on your peers for that. Give someone like, okay, person A and B got it, personal statement, then research statement. C and D got it, personal statement, or got the other way around. What are their experiences in reading? What's their feedback? And then always do some pre-writing. Don't just dive in. Map out where you're going with this statement, right? It's okay to get there, free write and start working through what you're doing. But if you're really crafting it, you know you're gonna have to be really conscious about it. Do the pre-writing and structure it out, map it out, however you want to outline that. Create that dialogue and that diagram for yourself so you can follow that structure, right? A little pre-planning is gonna save you a lot of work on the back end, right? As we talked about in the prior session, we talked about how really the advice we give is that you should be identifying funders about a year out from when you want to receive the funding, right? If you need the funding tomorrow, external funding is not going to be really as helpful, right? will have sometimes students reach out and saying, I'm struggling to pay my tuition for fall. Can you recommend a funding source? I can help guide you towards finding external funding in your area, but it's not gonna help you with this semester's tuition. Likely won't help you with the spring semester's tuition. Funders usually are about a year out, right? When they're collecting applications, doing the review, and then funding you for the coming year, right? And so you have to think about all the different opportunities you want to apply for, structuring them well, mapping that out on what you're doing, right? And so it's going to be busy. And so the pre-writing, anything you do to save time is valuable to you. All right. So we're actually doing really good on time. So I wanted to make sure I left time for questions and to go through these topics with you and review on different things. I will really quickly just reference, we do have, the wrong way. There is an incentive for completing these workshops. If you go to all 3 of our skills workshops in any semester, if you missed the first one, I'll be doing it again in spring, come back and do it, right? Anytime you've done it, if you go to all the workshops, at least once, go to at least one of my mini writing retreats, come in and do the work, right? Come talk to me about it, really briefly, right? Just get a consultation and then show that you've applied for the funding source. I'll give you a bookstore gift card, right? Nice little perk just for things you're already doing. We're trying to get you the scaffolding and the support for it, right? If you do these things, then we'll give you that gift card, right? I'm tracking as best as I can to find the folks who've done all of this, but if you know you've done it, let me know, right? And we'll work on getting you your benefit because you've earned it. But that is the incentive for the overall program. If you have additional questions or concerns, you can email GradFund. That's our email that we use for this, and we'll respond and help you out with that. If you're looking specifically at NSF GRFP or Fulbright, you can even reach out to Jen. We will still help you, but she's a primary resource for that. We actually had a record number of Fulbright applicants. We had 30 people apply for the Fulbright this year, which is amazing. And Fulbright's really happy with us for that, right? So if you want to do those things, Fulbright is, if you don't know, Fulbright is a study abroad graduate scholarship, right? It's really a great opportunity. These are the points of contact for you, right? I'm going to jump back. If you haven't done it yet, I'm going to put the QR code for attendance back up there if you need it. But then I'm going to jump into what questions do you have? And that's also the calendar for what we got coming up. So you can come to things. Right? So if you didn't get your attendance, but people online, people in person, I'm going to answer some questions. I see I got a question already in the chat. I'll get to that in a second. Thank you. I got 2 questions here online, some questions here as well. What do you got for me?
The QR code doesn't work.
The QR code doesn't work. Well, that's unfortunate. Okay. Is that the question or you just do a question too?
Oh, no, that's what I wanted to point out.
Got it. Okay. Let me really quickly get into MindTracker and I'll put a link out there for y'all to, and then for people here, I'll have you just sign in. So we've got that.
Regards to the article fellowship application, I was working on the research policy prospectus. How would you say that would be different from the research statement? I know that we were talking about, because I know in essence they sort of gave us the structure, and it's essentially a federal policy problem, how we aim to solve it, and stakeholders. And that's essentially, it's not something we'll be working on. They just want to see essentially what we're interested in.
Yeah.
What would you say would be the difference from what we sort of reviewed compared to?
So you're doing all the same things, but you're looking at more of like a theoretical problem, right? In the Archer Fellowship?
Yes.
A lot of the same principles are going to carry forward. And that you want to make sure you're writing that in a way that the reader is going to understand it. And being overly technical, you're wanting to tell your story in some way and why you qualified to do it. They're looking for innovation in that, right? A lot of the same principles are going to carry forward into that application. In that topic, and sometimes you'll have them where they give you more of a theoretical problem. And Archer Fellowship is a bit different because they're looking, basically it's an internship, right? To bring you in and do that. So they're not funding necessarily your research, they're bringing you on. And so they're looking at your problem solving, your initiative there, your creativity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Question.
Yeah, would you say I would be able to review that with you?
Yeah.
Maybe, I know I'll be reviewing it with graduate advisor, but always open to just get feedback in general.
Yes, if you reach out to us and you give us a good amount of time, we will do everything we can to help review and provide feedback. We also recommend using the writing coaches here at the Writing Center. They can also help you out with some of that. We're happy to do that. What I do say is, do give us enough lead time to support you, particularly because we are down a staff member, actually 2 staff members. So at the graduate school, we have a coordinator for student success position we're recruiting for right now. And then we actually are hiring a director for postdoc affairs and funding. And that person will do more of this type funding type work. Until we get those positions installed, I'm needing a bit more time than they may be able to give you, right? So give us a good amount of lead time and we'll help you out.
Okay,
Question.
appreciate it.
Question, is there a page limit? A sample template for grant writing, grants annual percentage of funds does the school take? Ooh, there's a lot of good questions. Is there a page limit? I'll take them in turn. Is there a page limit? Depends on the funding source. Some will have, I would say, I would hazard a guess, pretty much every fund is going to give you some kind of cap, right? What that cap is depends on the funder. We've had some where we're working through and we find out that like the proposal is research portion is 2 pages, right? So they give you 5. Think tangibly about that and use your space, right? If they tell you you got 5 and you write 3, come up with 2 more pages, right? But what's more likely to happen is you're going to work through, write a research statement, and then have to go through and edit it back down. That's much more likely to happen for you. Is there a sample template? We don't have one currently, but that's an interesting idea. I'm wondering if I can work with whoever the director for funding and postdoctoral folks is to work on something like that, or maybe post something. I'll start to Jen Green and see if she has any ideas on that. If we could put together a template when we revitalize our funding section, I'll put that out there. But we don't have one currently. That's a good question. Our grants annual? Yes, some are, but not all. Again, depends on the funder. So some examples, the Dodson Research Grant right now, again, an internal one, that's an annual offering. We used to offer it every semester. Due to changes in the funding, is now once a year. It has to be expended within that year. Compare that to, we have a grant at the graduate school with the Sloan Centers for Systemic Change that allows us to do 2 things. We have a cohort of students that we're giving professional development to, and then we're working with faculty specifically talking about mentorship, and then we're working towards a larger grant with them. So it's a seed grant, a starter grant. That is a 2-year grant. We have 2 years to do that work, and then that allows us to apply for the extension grant, which is $1.4 million that will fund student tuition, right? So we got a smaller grant to fund the cohort and the professional development. So that's a 2-year grant. So you'll see that sometimes they'll give you a 2 years of funding, sometimes it'll be annual. It really depends on the funder. And then what percentage does the school take? That is a really complex question that would really depend on the research that you're doing, the PI, funder, a lot of things, and whether or not there would be a percentage taken by the school. There are definitely things you can apply for that the money would not come to the school at all. That is funding for you. There are things you could apply for that there would be a portion that would go to the school, sometimes to pay you, right? They're basically then paying for you to be a student there, or paying your tuition, and that may come to us. So there's some differences there. So the broad answer to your question is it depends on the funder. So there's no one answer to that. Those are good questions, though. Other questions? Yes.
So for my master's, we don't decide really our thesis topic until, next semester.
Yeah.
And such, but then the research and kind of that whole process will start next year, next fall. You said you kind of recommend like around a year in advance of applying and doing this.
Yeah.
I was interested in the Dodson grant, but for example, we just don't have that concrete yet. So what would you recommend in that situation? Like, are there many grants still available then? Can we get funding kind of on a quicker base?
So that's a challenge. What you will find, I think at the master's level, you may find things that are moving at a bit of a quicker clip, right? Because they're looking at targeting master's funding.
Yeah.
They know you have a shorter time frame than a doctoral student. But even then, they're going to be looking at longer time frames than you assume, right? It's important to differentiate this from like the undergrad experience of like applying over the summer for scholarships for, the fall, right? You'll see some things like that. There'll definitely be some things like that, but majority of things are a longer time frame. And they're wanting to invest in you, in your time. With master's funding, because you have 2 to 3 years, they should shorten it. And there's definitely things you could apply for. If you're interested in the Dodson, let's talk offline too to see about your timetable and when you could apply potentially next, and see if that works for you. Unfortunately, I just have limited funding within the graduate school, and what's difficult is now that I come from the endowment, well, it always came from the endowment, but the way the university's fiscal office has changed it, I can't offer in fall and spring, and I can't extend it. Like I used to give you all a calendar year basically from awarding to use it, and then you could apply for an extension if you need it.
When are the funds available with the Dodson though, for example? Because
As soon as I can get them into your pocket, by your pocket, I mean your school, your program's account. We launched the Dodson in early, we actually changed our process. We used to wait till we got our allocation from the president's office, and then we would announce, like knowing we have the funding. And since we've been doing it for more than 10 years and we know we reasonably will get funding from the endowment from the president's office, in order to get it to the students faster, I announced the application much sooner and closed it before I even knew what our allocation was. Essentially, I got the allocation from the president's office the day after we closed the application. So we know how much we have now, which is great. But now all of a sudden we've closed the application, then we'll move into the review period. My hope, knock on wood, as long as the faculty review committee gets me all their information back, my hope is to notify everyone of their status by the close of the fall semester and transfer the funds by the end of the year. So that start January fresh, when you come back from your fall break or your winter break, you can start spending the money. And that's about a month and a half sooner than we have had in the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good question.
thank you.
Any other questions? Any online? For our folks online, if there were issues with the QR code, were you all able to sign in?
Yes,
You were? Excellent, good, thank you.
you're welcome.
All right, so if people online were able to sign in, that's great. For folks in person, I'll just collect your names and emails up here. We'll get that ready to go so we can get your attendance. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I did want to leave a good amount of time for questions on this session. I will hang around a little bit longer if you want to talk to me more individually about that, both online and in person. I'll wait till essentially everybody's left. So if there are questions you want to ask more independently, you can. Please do consider coming to our writing retreat next week. That will only be in person, so our folks online, that is only in person. Looks like Martin was not able to sign in. Martin, if you can hang on for a minute, I will, you know what, Martin, I will just write down your name. Thank you for that. Fortunately, we're having issues with that. Let me cite down your name. But please do come to the writing retreat if you're able to. Come bring that research statement, start working on it, make that progress. That's also a good opportunity that if you have not found a funder yet and you want to work with me on Pivot and finding funding, I will do consultations in the writing retreat talking about finding funding too. So if you're still working on that, I only am going to be able to do that as an in-person session though. So my people online, thank you for joining me online. I know that can be more convenient. If you can come join us in person, we'd love to see that. If you need a personal consultation, you can't join online, you want me to go through, just schedule a meeting with me. Come back for the personal statement workshop as well. It's a good one. We'll dig into that. That's actually can be more tricky than writing a research statement, right? Sometimes we feel really comfortable talking about what we're researching, but not super comfortable talking about ourselves or what makes us great, right? I'm a Midwesterner, and so I naturally am self-deprecating. I say, oh, you did such a good job. It's okay. I'm okay. I'm fine. It's tolerable, right? Your personal statement cannot be, I'm okay. It's gotta be selling, right? And so come back and learn about that if that's something you struggle with. And then we'll have that final writing retreat of the semester. for that. I do record all this, if you review any of it, maybe he said something, but I can't remember what it is. By next week, I'll have this recording up on our website, and then our previous one is already posted up, already there. And then last year's personal statement workshop is already also up, so if you know you can't join us and you really wanna dig into it, you can go and jump forward to the content, that's totally fine. Get it when you need it, but we're here for you. So, again, thank you folks who joined us online for hanging out with us. Thanks for the people in person. I will bring us to a close and just hang out for any last questions on an individual basis. Other than that, enjoy your day. Good rest of your week.
And